I am not without sympathy for people who have to try to serve the public and also serve Donald Trump. That said, to me, it seemed that Dr. Birx squandered some of her credibility with the 100% of the American public that is interested in what people like herself and Dr. Fauci have to say when she suggested or refused to condemn, from a public health standpoint, the decision on Georgia's part to open up hair salons and tattoo parlors and gyms.
Well, Nicole, you put it, you called it a three-ring circus. I hope it's just three rings, but it seems much more dire than that. We have an incredible array of mixed messaging coming from the top, which, of course, undermines anybody's ability to figure out what the right strategy is. Is it possible to open up a beauty salon? It might be, but not right now, not with the limited amount of testing we have. We can't go into a beauty parlor or barber shop and not know whether the barber has COVID-19 or not, or whether I have it and could give it to the barber or anybody else in the shop. So all these things are potentially doable. You know, Trump called this, a light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's probably the longest tunnel one could possibly imagine. And the light at the end of this tunnel is increasingly difficult to see what the pathway is to get there, at least under this very disorganized, dysfunctional leadership and mixed messaging that's coming from the top, Nicole.
What would your guidance be about Georgia's plan for reopening? I mean, are they trying to do too much too soon, or are those things that should be on the table for any state?
So, first of all, I do want to be sympathetic. I'll say this on behalf of the entire public health community. Nobody wants to delay any more than necessary the reopening of American business and everyday people getting their incomes back. That goes for sure. The problem is this question of which we keep repeating: can we open safely or not? But we can't open safely unless we could do testing, unless we could do a very effective, very efficient contact tracing to make sure we follow up with people who might be positive, and we make sure that we have new rules for the workplace. My center is going to put out a report the next couple of days that gets very specific about this, but to promise to give false hope to Americans that this could be done safely in the next few weeks is preposterous. And I really feel sorry that Dr. Birx is putting herself on the line like that. I can't even imagine what it must be like to be working for the Trump administration, trying to be true to the science and the evidence, say what makes sense, and still, not get fired by a very erratic boss. It's a tough position for her to be in, and I do feel sorry for her, Nicole.
Phil Rucker, science is a really fascinating foe for this president, who your newspaper has clocked more than 16,000 lies that have come out of his mouth just as president. And the science on one of the drugs that he touted, we played in the last hour, half a dozen instances where he said everything from try it to what have you got to lose about a drug treatment that was just studied and rendered to not be an effective or safe treatment for COVID-19. And I know we always ask this question about guardrails, but is there any respect for the scientists and the job they have, especially Anthony Fauci, of leading a department full of scientists?
Well, Nicole, there are a couple scientists around the table with the president. Drs. Fauci and Birx are two of them, but that's not to say that they're having a great deal of influence with him. They have access to him. They're able to present information to him. But this is a president who, and this predates the coronavirus, by the way, who puts emotion, who puts anecdote, who puts his gut instincts above raw intelligence, above fact, above science. He always feels like he's the one with the best instincts and knows where to go and knows what to decide, irrespective of what the experts around him have to say. And I have to think back to that visit he made early on during this pandemic to the CDC headquarters down in Atlanta, where he was getting a tour of the facility by some of the medical experts there. And he went on and on about what a genius he is, the president is, when it comes to science and medicine. And maybe he should have gone into that field. He, of course, is not educated in that field and is not credentialed in that field, but has so much faith in his own gut and his own instincts that it overrides a lot of times what the facts say and what the science lays bare.
I'm really good at this stuff. They couldn't believe how good at this stuff, he said. And then I think he dropped in that he was related to someone who went to MIT or something. I'll never forget that, and I'll never be the same. He was also wearing a red, not a MAGA hat, but a Keeping America Great Again hat and an inexplicable windbreaker. Phil Rucker, I've got one more for you. He's also someone who's a slave to the polls. And here's what the polls say about easing social distancing restrictions. This is in the important coronavirus hotspot, but also an important political state of Florida. 72% would like social distancing restrictions extended into May, and only 22% would like them loosened by the end of April. So the president now at odds with the political will of a pretty important state in terms of defeating and pushing back against the spread of coronavirus, as well as a state that I'm sure, more important to the president, is a political battleground.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Nicole, because Florida, before this pandemic began, was seen as a swing state, very much leaning in the president's direction. In fact, there were some doubts as to whether the Democratic nominee would really contest that state as aggressively as some of the other swing states because of Trump's popularity there. And yet we're seeing now that Floridians are not in agreement with what the president is trying to do in terms of restarting the economy so soon. And one specific demographic I would keep an eye on are people over the age of 65, seniors. They're the most vulnerable, obviously, to the coronavirus, but they're also a really important voting bloc for the president in his reelection campaign all across the country, and in no state more than Florida, where so many retirees have moved. And so I would be interested to see how that demographic shifts in these polls.
Donna, it's a great point, and it's also a political constituency where even if we hadn't been in the throes of a global pandemic, Joe Biden is very strong in that age group as well. I want to ask you about something that is happening sort of as we come on the air. This is again sort of a recurring plot twist in the Trump story. There's an attempt at a walk back, not from the head of the CDC, but from the White House, about what the head of the CDC said about a potentially more deadly second wave of coronavirus. If you need any evidence that in this three-ring circus, everyone's getting pressure and a squeeze from Donald Trump to stay on his chosen political message, it's happening in real time as we're talking. The president is talking about a new statement saying the CDC director was totally misquoted by fake news CNN on COVID. He will be putting out a statement. That usually is a public extortion or a public threat. The statement hasn't come out yet, and the quote was in an interview in the Washington Post, not CNN, showing that the president, again, isn't getting his information from anything he reads, but from the cable network he just can't quit, CNN.
Well, Nicole, as I think about the director of the CDC, he's much in the same position, frankly, as Dr. Birx. Anybody who is around the president eventually finds himself, swirling around in the muck of the president's obfuscation, his blaming, and his outright lying. And they either have to sacrifice their own credibility or they choose to be in the good graces of the president of the United States. Up here is where we are potentially losing lives. And so I fully expect that every time the president takes to the podium, he's going to lie and obfuscate. What I don't expect is that our leaders, the head of the CDC, Dr. Birx, in her capacity as an advisor to the American people, doing that as well. And it really does great damage to the public that is confused about what the guidelines mean, what the restrictions are, what the risks are going into the future. And frankly, the information from the CDC yesterday, the director's statements were perhaps the most chilling that we have heard, because we weren't prepared before, we're not prepared now, and it is difficult to see how this president and this administration will make certain that we are prepared when the fall comes.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.